Hello, you wonderful people. Back to part 4 of the Strapi Crash Course. Today we're going to take a look how populate and filtering works in Strapi. In our previous tutorial, we created a new content to represent our data in our global page. We have our banner, our header, and our footer. Then we went ahead inside our content manager, created and added data to that collection type. Notice how we have our data for our global page, including the title, description, our data for our banner, our data for our header, which has the image, has our nav items, has our call to action, and footer. In the previous video, when we populated our entry without passing any flags, when we take a look at the response, we only get the ID, document ID, title, description, created at, updated at, and published at. Every request that you make in Strapi will always have the ID and document ID. It would always have the following fields: created, updated, and published at. But title and description, these are the fields that we have here in our content, title and description. But how come the banner and any of its children don't show up? In order to help us to better understand that, let's jump back into our content type builder and look at the fields. I'm just going to randomly click add new fields, and we're going to see that Strapi has a couple of different fields here: text, boolean, rich text blocks, JSON, number, email, date, password, and rich text markdown, including the enumeration, are considered top level fields. So what does that mean? For test purposes, we're just going to create a dummy collection type. I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm going to call it test for now. And I'm going to click continue. So I'm going to add a text element. I'm going to call it text. Add another field. We're going to add a boolean. Add another field. We're going to add our rich text blocks. I'm going to call it rich text. Let's add another field. We're going to add JSON. This is going to be JSON. Add another field. We're going to add number. We're going to just choose an integer. Going to say number. Add another field. We're going to say email. And we're going to call it email. Add another field. Let's add our date. We're going to say date. Add another type. Date is just going to be date. Let's now add another field. We're going to add our password. We're going to say password. Add another field. We're going to add enumeration. We're going to say enum. We're going to say type 1, type 2. So just have a couple of options. Add another field. We have our UI ID. We're going to call it slug, and that's going to be based off our text field. Let's add another field, which is finally going to be our rich text markdown. I'm going to call this markdown, and finish. So if we take a look here, all the fields that we added here: text, boolean, rich text, JSON, number, email, date, password, enum, slug, and markdown, these are all top level fields, and they're going to show up in the table, which is going to be in our test collection. So let's save and go to our content manager, and we're going to go to our test collection that we're going to delete in just a moment, and we're going to create a new entry. Text, I'm going to say text, boolean is true, rich text. Let's go to JSON. It's going to be JSON. Then we have our number. We're going to say 10. Email, paul@email.com. Date, let's add a date. Password, I'm going to say my password. And for enum, we're going to say type 1. Slug, we're going to say slug. And for markdown, we're going to say markdown. Now we're going to go ahead and save and publish. And we're going to go ahead to settings in our users permission roles. under public, we're going to say, hey, let's do find for test one. Don't forget to save. And we'll be able to make a GET request to this endpoint. And what we should be able to see, we should see all of our top level fields. We won't need to tell Strapi to populate them because they're going to be by default, because these are non-relational data. And when we take a look in the database, you'll notice that all of these items are going to live in the database where this test collection lives. So here, instead of global, we're going to go to API test, click send, and notice we're able to get our ID, document ID, like we mentioned before, but from our fields. We're able to get our text, our Boolean, our rich text, our JSON data, our number, our email, our date, our enum, our slug, our markdown. And we're not getting the password, but that's because I believe password is a private field that we're not able to return. Because if you set a password, you don't want somebody to be able to access it inside a request. So that makes perfect sense. But all the other fields are here. Now, I'm going to open up my database, SQLite, open database, and we're going to choose our Strapi database. And inside our database, we're going to find our tests table, which is our test collection. And we're going to go ahead and query the items. What you will notice here, that all those top level fields are represented in this table: text, Boolean, rich text, JSON number, email, date. We have password, which is hashed, so no one can see the actual password. We have our enum, slug, and markdown, and all the other standard fields that come with Strapi. So now, if we go back to our Strapi application, so now in test, let's go ahead and add another field. For this example, we're going to take a look at our components, and we're going to use an existing component, and we're going to select the component. And for our component, we're going to select our link. I'm going to call it link, and click single component and finished, and click save. Now let's navigate to our content manager, go to test, open our entry, and if we scroll down, we're going to see that we have a link component. We're just going to add some basic stuff here and click save and publish. So now navigating back to our VS Code instance, and we're going to rerun the query. And if we scroll down, we still don't see the link here. But let's take a look in our database table. Let's go back to tests, rerun it, open this window a little bit up, and we're going to scroll. We have our rich text, we have JSON, number, email, date, password, enum, slug, markdown, created at, updated at. And it's like, wait a second, how come we don't see the link in this table? Because the link here, if we look at our different collection types, if we take a look at our different types that we have in Strapi, component that we just added via our link component, dynamic zone, media, and relations are database relations. So they're not going to be inside the table that we were looking at. Instead, let's refresh our SQL Explorer. Notice now we have a new table called test CMPS. So now if we open it, we see that here we have entity ID, integer ID, component type, fields, order, and float. Here, this is our linking table that shows our relationship. For instance, we added a relationship to our shared link that is being tied back in to our test table. So notice we have ID 1 and 4. If you look at the linking table, it is pointing the relationship to that entity 1 and 4. So all the relationship fields that we don't get in the query is because they live in a different table, and we will need to tell Strapi that we want to specify the item that we want to get. And we talked before that we could say populate, just like this, equals star, which is a wildcard, will populate all the items one level deep. If you click send and take a look at our response, notice that you now see our link. So this automatically will reference our linking table and populate any related items. Even though you could use populate star, it's not recommended. Instead, you want to make sure that you are literally just asking for the items that you want. So instead of using this, for learning purposes, we're going to Google Strapi Query Builder, which is an easier way for us to build our queries that then we could get in this LHS syntax. So here I'm going to say we want to go to tests because that was our endpoint, and I'm just going to delete everything. And here I could write my query. You could learn more about this in Strapi documentation, and as we continue to build this, we'll look at this in greater detail. But for now, if I take a look at my Strapi instance and I go back to our test dummy data, notice that we have our link. So if I want to populate all the items in the link, I could just say populate and tell Strapi what items I want to populate. I want to populate link, and I could say true. I'm going to copy this back in VS Code. Notice I remove the wildcard. If I click send, our link is gone. So now I'm going to paste our LHS syntax here that says we want to populate link and we want to show it. When I click send and we scroll down, notice that we have our link element. And what you could do, you could actually just say, I don't want all the items. I just want to populate the href and the label. So back to our query builder, I could say link. I just want to populate fields, which is an array. And we said we want to populate href and label. So now I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And back here, I'm going to paste this in. And when I click send, we scroll down to the link. Notice the link, we're only getting back our href and label. So why is this a powerful feature? Because it allows you to be in control of exactly the items you want to return from your API. So now that we get a very simple introduction to how this works, and we'll dive more into this, and don't worry, we won't have to pass this query string all the time. I'll show you how we could use this object notation and how we could simplify the query by creating a custom middleware that will populate our items automatically. So this way, you don't have to write this query from the front end, because whenever you write any query from the front end, that means that anybody who can access the request from the front end could change the query and ask the data that they want. Instead, we're just going to pre-populate our data based on this criteria on our server. And if you're not sure what this means, we're going to cover that in the next video. But for this video, let's take a look at our content type builder. I'm going to delete this table because we don't need it. And instead, we're going to jump back into our global profile, and we'll slowly go through this to build the query to show our data, and we're going to do it piece by piece. So I'm going to update this back to global and make a simple request. And we see our data without any of our additional populate items. In the query builder, and I'm just going to replace this with global. And I'm going to remove everything in between our populates and just leave an empty object. So we're going to work on this together. So taking a look at our application here, We know that our title and description are top level fields, so they're going to get populated automatically. But the banner is a component. So we have to tell Strapi that we want to populate the banner. So I'm going to go inside my interactive builder, and I'm going to say banner true. And if we copy this and try it out, notice that we are now getting our banner. But if we take a look at our banner has our link component in our relationship. So because it's a relation, we need to tell Strapi to populate it as well. So instead of saying banner true, I will also say populate, and we're going to say link equals true. So now we're going to go ahead and copy our query, go back, paste it in, and click send. So notice now we're getting our banner and we're getting our link. There's a couple of different ways that we could represent this data. There is a shorthand. For instance, instead of saying populate banner, populate link true, we could say this populate is actually, instead of an object, going to be an array. And inside that array, we could say populate banner dot link, and this is going to populate banner and all of its children in the link. So now if we go and replace the previous query, paste it in, click send, notice that we're still getting the data. Now let's take a look. We got our banner data. So now let's get our header data. And for header, if we say we want to populate header, logo, and not forget the image, we could do it shorthand. So what I could say here, populate header dot logo dot image, logo dot image. And now if I don't forget your comma there, copy, and we try this again and paste it in. So notice, not only do we have our banner, but we have our header with our logo, and our logo has our image. One thing that you notice that our image has a lot of this data, and maybe this is not all the data that we need. So instead of using the shorthand, and if you're getting a little bit confused, that is okay. We'll cover this in more detail. If we want to drill down and be very specific with what fields that we want to do, then we would have to use our object notation. And I want to talk about this now because this is one of the most confusing places in Strapi. When you start populating deeply nested data, a lot of people are like, oh, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of work when you're first learning this, but because this gives you the power to control exactly the data that you want, you're able to keep your responses lean and performant. So now let's rewrite what we previously had using the object notation. We're going to say that we want to populate the banner, and inside the banner, we're going to populate our link, and we're going to say true. And then after our banner, we want to populate our header with the logo and the image. So we're going to say header, and we're going to say populate, and we're going to say logo, and inside logo, we want to populate our image, but instead of everything, we just gonna say for the fields, we want to return only alternative text and URL. So before we add the rest of the items, let's take a look and see what we have. So I'm going to copy the query string, and I'm going to go and paste it in and click send. And make sure that you spell things correctly. It's populate. So let's try that again. Copy the updated query, paste it in, and we run our query. And now notice we have our banner data. We have our header data, which has our logo. And for our image, instead of getting all that extra data, we're just getting the alternative text and the URL. So now, taking a look at our content type builder, inside our header, we also have our nav items. So now, still in our header, populate, after the logo, we're going to say we want to populate nav items. And we're going to say true. We also have, after nav items, our call to action. So I'm going to say CTA true. And now let's test it before adding additional changes. Back in Postman, go ahead and replace our previous query, paste and send. And notice now we have our banner, we have our header, which has our logo, our nav items, and our call to action. And finally, if we scroll down, we have our footer. So let's go ahead and do that. So after the header, we're going to say we want to populate the footer. And inside the footer, we're going to populate our logo because we have it there. And the logo population is going to be very similar to this because that's exactly what we want. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. After our logo, in our footer, right? So in our footer, we have our logo. We then have our nav items. So let's populate our nav items. We're going to say true. And finally, we want to populate our social links. And saying social links true will only return the top level fields. Label, href is external. But because we have a relationship, we would have to say and specify that we want to get that image. So instead, what we're going to say, social links populate, and we want to populate the image. So we're just going to copy this because this is very similar, paste it in. So we're saying for social links, populate the image. And now when we copy to clipboard, I'm going to go ahead and test it out. So let's go ahead, paste it in, click send. And notice now we're getting all of our data. We have our banner, we have our header, which has our logo, our nav items, and our call to action. We also have our footer, which has our logo, our nav items, and our social links. So now that we know that we're able to get all of our data from our API, you probably are saying, hey, Paul, this is pretty ridiculous. Like, I don't want to write this huge query string. And when people starting out, very common, they will use a library called QS, take the object notation that we see here, and using the QS library that you see here, convert it to the query string that you see here written in LHS syntax. And in the front end, they would make a request to their endpoint, passing in this query and get the data. But in the next video, I'm going to show you more of an advanced feature so we don't have to mess with that. We're actually going to create a custom middleware where we're going to pass this query for our populate logic, and it will automatically populate our Strapi data without us having to do all this work. And the good news, you only have to do this once. So to recap, in Strapi, any top level field like title, description, like we saw before, are going to be populated automatically. But anything that's a relationship, like a media, relation, component, or dynamic zone, because those are relations, you would need to use the query string notation to tell Strapi what items you want to populate. And if you're feeling lost, don't worry, you could always check the docs, and I'm going to walk you every step of the way. But let me tell you, at the beginning, this is hard to learn, but once you learn it, it's going to make it much easier working with Strapi Endpoint. And when you have lots of data, you will be able to pick and choose only the items that you want to return without having to return any unnecessary data that you don't need. And while you wait for the next video, in the Strapi.website, in their blog, you could search for a route-based middleware, how to handle Populate query. And here I just updated this tutorial that Kellen wrote a while back with a simple example that kind of walks us through exactly what we did, talking about how when you initially populate things in Strapi, you just get top level fields. And if you want to get additional data, for instance, I show here title, description, and slug. These are all top level fields, but cover, author, because it's a relation, category, it's a relation, and blocks because it's a component in a dynamic zone. Those are relations. You actually have to tell Strapi that you want to populate them by creating the query that we talked about. And here, as you can see in the blog post, you could see the library that I reference where you pass in that object notation, exactly similar to what we have here in our query builder. And you will, in return, get the query string generated by the QS package that you could pass to your endpoint to generate all of your data. But what's even cooler, I'm going to show you a more advanced feature that we cover here, which you should learn about right from the start, where instead of doing that, you create a middleware and you pass your query inside your middleware, which will allow your Strapi app to automatically populate that data without having to do all this additional work every time from the front end. So I know it's a lot, but I figured let's rip the band-aid off and learn this advanced feature because it's going to make things easier. And if someone complains, because they often do, and says, why can't you just return all the data? It's because that's stupid. If you have 1,000 entries, again, I'm being hyperbolic here, and 1,000 items, and you try to return all of them with all those deep nested relations, it will slow down your application. And it's not Strapi, it's just when you're building APIs and you're requesting data being transferred to you, you have to take that into consideration, because the more queries you make on different associated tables and relations in SQL or Postgres or whatever database you're using, that is going to have a performance hit. So you want to make sure that you do things as optimally as possible. And this is why we have Populate and filtering in Strapi to allow you to be very specific around what data you want to get from what tables. So with that being said, you could always reference the Strapi documentation, but I'll see you in the next video where we're going to build our custom middleware. So if you got this far, do not delete this query because we're going to use it in our middleware to pre-populate our data. So see you in the next one.